Hi everybody. I want to talk to you today about MLA documentation. MLA stands for Modern Language Association, and that's an organization that establishes kind of the ground rules for publications in English and in sometimes in history, sometimes in psychology. I think they use APA more. But some of the various fields of publications. And so they establish the rules for how publications are documented, how they're formatted, and that's the style that we're using for these first couple of papers. It's probably the most common documentation style and formatting style, and so it's one that you'll use in a lot of your papers throughout college. So I want you to know it, and I want you to know it pretty well, because again, it is common and it's fairly easy to use once you get the hang of it. And so I want to show you around in that. So MLA, Modern Language Association, formatting and documentation style. So you read about documentation in chapters 23 and 24, and they cover that pretty thoroughly and give you some really good examples. I also have a handout for you in this week's materials that talks about quoting and shows you some samples of how to quote. Chapter 23 talks quite a bit about that, and also shows you how to document when you do quote. MLA requires that you do two things when you cite from a source. And all that means, when I say cite, is that means you use a source and you give credit to it. So instead of acting as if information is your own, as if you already knew it, you give credit to the person you got the information from. And it's especially important, it's essential, in fact, that you do that when you quote, when you use someone's exact words. Because if you don't give credit when you use someone's exact words, then you have stolen their words. You have committed an academic offense called plagiarism, and you can fail a paper, you can even fail a course, you could possibly be expelled from a school for plagiarizing. Now, plagiarism comes in degrees. Sometimes it's fairly innocuous, it's fairly unintentional, that you do it and you don't intend to, you don't document correctly. Regardless, that's plagiarism, because I'm teaching you how to do it, and our materials teach you how to do it. And so you could fail a paper for it. It could be as simple as forgetting to cite the source, or forgetting to give someone's names, or forgetting to put quotation marks around several words that you quote from someone. Regardless, that's plagiarism. It could be as blatant and as intentionally dishonest as buying a paper from someone and buying it online and presenting it as if you did the work yourself. That's an outright intentional instance of plagiarism, which would result in my case, in failing the course. And so you want to learn how to avoid plagiarism and be forthright and be honest in your use of someone else's material in your paper, in your work, and all your work. And so I want to talk about how to go about that and just show you how that's done. So let's see, let me get into our course materials, into our content. So chapter 23, actually let me open the PowerPoints and walk through some of this PowerPoint with you. For chapter 23, Was hoping I could open these a little more quickly. Looks like they're going to take their time. There it comes with chapter 23. They talk about the difference between using a summary, using a paraphrase, and using a quotation. Now, we talked last week about summarizing, and that's what you'll do with Stephen March's article in your first paragraph for sure. And that's taking a large amount of material and condensing it. When you paraphrase, you take a smaller amount of material and you put it in your own words in about the same number of words. So you might take a sentence or an idea and you express that in your own sentence, or a couple of sentences that restate that idea. And so you've just paraphrased it. You've put someone else's words into your own words. And that's what you want to do most of the time when you're citing someone. You still want to give them credit by using their name and a page number if the idea is from a specific page, summarizing, paraphrasing a particular idea. And then quotation. And you quote when you use someone's exact words. And you want to do that fairly sparingly. You want to do that when you come across someone's words where they say something so well that you couldn't possibly say it any better. And sometimes we say, well, I could never say what they've said any better. But most of the time you can say it as well. And so you want to quote pretty sparingly and just quote exceptionally phrased, something that's said really, really well. And then when you do that, you always put them in quotation marks. Or as I showed you the other day, quotation marks, since I can't say it without making the marks. And when we use someone's information, we always have to use an attributive tag. And all that means is that you use a phrase, a tag, that gives the person's name or gives the source's name. So you are attributing, giving credit for that information. You are attributing that information to the person that it came from or to the source that it came from. And so that's what they talk about here in this chapter. You want to avoid, when you are paraphrasing, you want to avoid what the textbook calls patch writing. And that is using one or two of the author's words and then a couple of your own and then a couple of the author's and then a couple of your own, as if that is an adequate paraphrase. That's not really putting it in your own words. It really is just patching together. It's using the original phrasing, the original structure of the sentence, and yet you're changing one or two words to say, well, but I didn't quote it. I put it in my own words, when you didn't really do that. And so when you paraphrase, what I've found works best for me is I read it again so that I really understand what the writer is trying to say, and then I close that and I put it away so I can't look at it while I'm trying to write it in my own words. Because I found if I have it there and it's here in front of me, then I'm looking at that and then trying to write it in my own words and then looking back, and I'm staying so close to the original that I am doing that patch writing, and that's just not a good strategy to use. So read it, understand it, and then put it aside, and then write it in your own words. Quote when you are capturing something from the original that is just really memorable, that's really said so well you can't say it any better. You can quote an entire sentence or a couple of sentences, or you can quote words or phrases. If you quote have a longer quotation, then you will handle that a little differently, and I show you that in the handout, how to do that, and chapter 23 also shows that to you. When you omit something from something you've quoted, you want to make sure that you still maintain its original meaning, but you might leave out a phrase from the middle. And so you can do that using an ellipsis. You can also use brackets, and actually I think the previous page might have talked about that. When you modify a quotation, you can do that. And so all of that material is provided for you. That information is provided for you in chapter 23, talking about how to quote. So some different strategies for using your source: when you need to summarize, when you need to paraphrase, when you need to quote something short, or when you need to quote something that is longer. So methods of citing. The preferred method is to use the author's name in your sentence in an attributive tag when you can. What that does is that prevents you from ever quoting an entire sentence without a tag telling who it's from. Never, never, when? Never do that. Never just pull a sentence out from a source that you want to use and just plop it down there and put quotation marks around it. Never do that. That is a poor use of your source. When you want to quote an entire sentence, always attribute it according to March, or March says, or March states, or March comments that, and then quote that sentence, but never just plop it down in your writing without introducing it. Sometimes within your sentence you will have a quote that you don't have a tag for, and you can cite that at the end of your sentence in what's called a parenthetical citation. And with that, I'm making my parentheses with my hands now instead of my quotation marks. With a parenthetical citation, you will use parentheses at the end of the sentence to give the author's name. And so that is how you would attribute that information. And so some uses, some reasons that we use attributive tags, their value, and how you can do that, how you can add to your attributive tags to make them more interesting and to indicate the importance of the source, or the importance of the value of the source, showing the credentials of the author. And so some tips there for doing that. Ways that plagiarism can occur, and so you want to avoid those. And so some good information there. Chapter 24 also gives you some information, good information. It'll be more valuable later when you're creating your own works cited pages for your next two papers. But right now it gives you information about what needs to be cited and what doesn't, the understanding between how you cite your work in your paper and what you put on your works cited list at the end. And all you need to know about for that is that because your works cited citation begins with Stephen March's last name, March, then that is what you have to use in your paper, in your in-text citations, either in your attributive tag, according to March, or Stephen March says such and such. Then you have done enough, you've provided enough information to let the reader know to go to your works cited page and find a source that is titled, that begins with the word March. And that is the connection between what you do in your paper to refer to your source and what you do on your works cited page. So those are the two pieces of information that you need in your paper to be using your MLA documentation style. So a lot of information there, and again, a handout that shows you some samples. Chapter 23 and chapter 24 also provide that. They're just excellent resources for you. And so I hope that you have found good information, valuable information to help you with this particular piece of your writing.